Right, so I make it bang on 10 o'clock now. So good morning, everybody. Welcome to our webinar on Risk, Daring to Dare. So I'm just going to give it a couple of minutes while we let another couple of the delegates log on. My name's Jennifer. I'm working with ISO Quality Services. And we're hosting this webinar today together with Steve, who you probably can see as well. Give us a wave, Steve.
Good morning.
Steve is from Risk Evolves, and Steve will introduce himself and tell you a little bit about himself in a moment. So we're just going to give it another minute or two whilst we wait for everyone else to join. So we'll be back with you in just another couple of minutes. Okay, so it looks like we've had another couple of people join us. So we're a couple of minutes past 10, so we'll get started. So if anybody that has just joined us, as I've already mentioned, my name's Jennifer. I'm from ISO Quality Services, ISO certification and implementation business based in Worcester in the West Midlands. So welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning on our webinar on Risk, Daring to Dare. I thought I'd just start off just by explaining, if you haven't, I'm sure actually everybody's done a lot of these webinars over the last 12 to 14 weeks, but if you are new to this, just explaining a couple of the tools that we have available to us today. So we have the chat function, which we've already started using, so thank you for that. And we also have a question and answer function. So at the bottom of your screen, or somewhere on your screen, you should see a Q&A and the chat function. So just to get things going, if we could all maybe just pop in the chat where you're joining us from today. So I'm from not so sunny Worcester in the West Midlands, but if you could just maybe just pop in the chat just so we can check it's working and that you can all hear me okay, where you're joining us from today. So Yvonne's from cloudy Suffolk, damp Kent, Loughborough, York, Coventry, Wiltshire, Essex. Steve's broadcasting from mid-Bedfordshire. Oh, we've got Ireland, Kerry, Cannock, Berkshire, and Droitwich. Oh, fab. So we've got quite a mix across the country and Ireland as well. So welcome, everybody. It's really, really great to have you all here. So please feel free to pop questions in the Q&A and we will answer them at the end. So we've got some time at the end for questions then. So if we're going along and Steve's mentioning something and you want to ask a question, pop it in there and I'll make sure that we get those covered. If you have anything just general, anything to say during the presentation, then please do use the chat function as well. So I will be monitoring the chat function. I will be turning my video off and going on mute as not to distract from Steve's excellent presentation, but if you do have anything,
you don't know it's excellent yet.
I do. I've had a sneak preview. And so if you do have anything that you want to mention, pop it in the chat and I'll be on there. So without further ado, we will get going. I will hand you over to Steve, who will explain a little bit more about Risk Evolves and himself, and then get straight into our webinar.
Right, good morning everyone, and thanks Jennifer. You should be able to pick up my slides at the moment, so we'll just see if we can move these on. There we go, that's ISO QSL. So, risk management daring to dare. I'm Steve Fowler, The good news is I'm not a risk manager. I've spent my lifetime working in businesses, large and small. Today, I'm working with Risk Evolves. At Risk Evolves, we provide risk management and cybersecurity advisory services for businesses of all sizes, from FTSE 100s down to micro businesses. And as business people ourselves, we know that risk and opportunity are two sides of the same coin. I'll tell you a bit more about Risk Evolves towards the end, but I'm sure we're dying to get going with today's presentation. So we'll just bring up the agenda. This is what I'm going to try and cover in the next 40 minutes. So we've got 40 minutes of talk from me, and then we've got 20 minutes of general conversation. What I'm going to do, in order not to distract from the slides, is just to take myself off screen so you can focus on the material and focus on what we've got to say. So if I just do that first, right, you should just have the slides up on the screen now. So, risk management. According to Bloomberg, 8 out of 10 businesses fail within the first 18 months. Why is that? Well, fundamentally, it's down to a failure to manage risk. And we all remember the Daleks, don't we? As the Daleks would say, resistance is futile, but we're not going to talk about that today. What we're going to talk about prediction is prediction. Prediction is futile. Let's just think back over the last 20 years. The Brexit vote, did the analysts get that right? No, they all thought that we were going to vote to stay in Europe. Trump, did anyone predict that Trump was going to be elected? Well, right up to the day before the election, Americans were telling me, no, he'll never be elected. 9/11, was that predicted? The global financial crisis, and now COVID-19. The reality is that we get these things wrong on a regular and almost predictable basis. And this is where risk management comes in. Risk management can help us prepare for the unexpected. That's what the subject's about. Now, when it all goes horribly wrong, big companies fail. In the top right-hand corner of this slide, you can see Nokia, and the blobs below Nokia are that company BlackBerry. Anyone remember BlackBerry? Nokia and BlackBerry were once household names in the mobile phone industry. No more. In the bottom middle row, the bottom of the, towards the middle of the bottom row, we've got Atari. Atari more or less invented the computer games industry. They are no more. They're no more than a brand name. And in the bottom right-hand corner, we've got Kodak. Not many people know that Kodak actually invented the digital camera. They were so horrified by their invention, they actually hid it away. Why were they horrified by it? You'd think, well, camera company, you know, film company, good idea. Well, no, they saw themselves as a film and film processing chemical company. And therefore, the invention of a camera that didn't use any film threatened their core business. They didn't see the paradigm shift coming, that we would move to a more convenient means of photography. So it was actually reinvented by a couple of Japanese companies 3 years after Kodak invented it. Kodak still exists, but nowhere near the size of what they were. So that's all very negative, and I don't like to start on a negative basis, really. Strategic risk management, if you get it right, it's about making business successful and enduring. There are two sides to risk. Risk is both threat and opportunity. In the words of Warren Buffett, and if I were doing this presentation a year ago, I'd say the world's richest man, Warren Buffett. Risk comes from not knowing what you're doing. Of course, Warren Buffett is no longer the world's richest man. He's now the world's second richest man. Because of COVID-19, one of the unexpected effects of COVID-19 is that Jeff Bezos of Amazon is now the world's richest man. All of us buying stuff through Amazon has made him exceedingly wealthy. Anyway, Warren Buffett's still worth listening to. Risk comes from not knowing what you're doing, fundamentally. Let's take some other definitions of risk. Well, Cambridge English Dictionary, Oxford English Dictionary is much the same. It says the possibility of something bad happening. However, there's also a board game called Risk, the game of strategic conquest. Actually, that's not necessarily about something bad happening. That's about the ability to take over the world. So you can see coming through here, you've got those two views of risk, the threat side, the dictionary definition, but also the opportunity side. And actually, if you look at the word risk comes from an Italian verb, rischiare, meaning to dare. In Chinese, risk is portrayed as two characters, wai chi, meaning danger, opportunity. So when we decided to call this webinar Daring to Dare, we really meant it. This is not about negative stuff happening. What it is, it's also about achieving positive things as well. Now, ISO. Of course, like all good subjects, ISO have a standard. I actually sit on the British Standards Committee that contributes to this. ISO 31000 has been around for quite a while now. Well, since 2009, it was recently refreshed a couple of years ago. And ISO 31000 describes risk as the effect of uncertainty on an organization's objectives. See, there's an important difference there between uncertainty and risk. Uncertainty, we're surrounded by uncertainty in life. And if we all worried about all the uncertainties all the time, we'd get nowhere. So for instance, it might rain today, it probably will somewhere in the world, but will it affect this webinar? Well, probably not. So therefore that's an uncertainty that doesn't have an impact on the objectives of this webinar. And we'll keep coming back to this theme. Risk management is about focusing on those risks that matter. And risks can come from both inside your organization, so traditional operational risks, process failures, quality failures, health and safety failures, but also externally. And again, COVID-19. I told myself before I put this presentation together, I wasn't going to mention COVID-19, but it does come in quite a few places through the presentation. COVID-19, classic example of an external risk. And there are lots of different types of risk. There's no right or wrong way of categorizing risk. What's right for one opportunity, for one organization, could be completely wrong for another one. It's what's right for you that matters. But the big thing about this slide is just the range of things that's listed here. I mean, if you go out and ask someone in the street about risk, they'll probably think about health and safety failures, maybe IT failures, maybe project failures. What they won't necessarily think about are the first two categories listed here, strategic risks and financial risks. But it's in these two areas that either make or break a business. So let's just look at financial first and then go back to strategic. The UK's decision to exit the EU has led to the pound dropping over 20% against the euro. That's just a fact, it's not an opinion. So remember I said earlier that risk consists of both threat and opportunity? Well, the opportunity here from the drop in the value of the pound is that exports are cheaper. So if you're a manufacturing or service company based in the UK, you're more likely to achieve more business outside the UK as a result of the pound dropping. But it also raises a threat, namely, if you're making things, and usually if we make things from raw materials or component parts from somewhere else, the component parts are going to be more expensive. So classic example of a financial risk. Strategic risks are ultimately, though, where organizations succeed or fail. We saw Kodak earlier and Kodak's inability to predict the change in the photography market. Let's just take another one, autonomous vehicles. That raises, again, both opportunities and threats for the motor industry. So we'll keep coming back to this theme that risk is both opportunity and threat. And it's how you deal with those opportunities and threats and keep them in balance that matters. Now, many people say to me, well, there's one thing missing from this slide, and that's reputation. Well, I always think reputation isn't a risk class in itself. It's the impact of other risks happening. So you probably remember the Merlin Entertainments, the people who run Alton Towers, the Smiler ride, the crash that had on that ride a few years ago, which was not good for the people who were on the ride at the time. So it wasn't just the injuries to people on the ride at the time, it's also the reputational impact of the risks. And you look at almost any risk listed on this slide, all of them have a reputational impact. And again, those reputational impacts can be both good and bad. So why manage risk? Well, lots of reasons to manage risk. Traditionally, it's to protect lives, to stop people dying at work, and to comply with legislation to stay in business. But good risk management actually saves costs in business. It reduces rework. It also helps you manage your supply chain. If you get your management of risk right, you're less likely to have problems with suppliers and customers. Also, you'll probably find that many of us on this call today will have requirements from our customers in terms of the way we run our risk management. So it's essential there. Remember, we said that risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. Good risk management helps us achieve our objectives, both overall as a business, but also within individual projects. It keeps our staff happy, it keeps our customers happy, keeps all of our stakeholders happy, and therefore helps protect our reputation. But the most important one, and the one I've highlighted at the bottom of the screen, is it helps us survive and thrive in business. So how to do it? Well, 3 simple rules. It's not complicated. Anyone tells you risk management is all about equations. It isn't. They're fibbing. A lot of this is applied common sense. It's not scary either. Again, if someone tries to blind you with science, and there are some geeky words that are used by risk management consultants. At Risk Evolves, we don't believe in geeky words. We believe in plain English communication. Risk management should not be scary. It should be related to the language of the business you operate in. And it does work. Organisations that practice good risk management tend to achieve better results than those that don't. So let's just go back to ISO. And this is quite a busy slide here, but there are 3 key things to grasp. ISO 31000 is actually quite a short document. It's about 10 pages, possibly less. And it splits risk management down into 3 component parts: principles, process, and framework. And like all good presentations, I'm just going to take each of those in order. So first of all, principles. The standard actually describes 8 core components of risk management. Because this is only a short session this morning, I'm just going to focus in on 3 of them: integration, customization, and human and cultural factors. Integration, first of all. Risk management's nothing if it's not integrated into your business processes. My own belief is that risk management done well should be integrated with the rest of the work on various standards that you might implement within your business. And we're going to touch on how to do that later in this webinar. It should be customized. So what's right for a nuclear power station, I can tell you, will not be right for an engineering shop in Wolverhampton. You've got to get it. It's the same as project management in that respect. It's got to be got right for the nature and the size of the business that you're operating. But perhaps most important of all are what are known on this slide as human and cultural factors. In other words, us, the people in our business. Good risk management involves good leadership and having the right culture in your business, doing things the right way. Just think of businesses that you admire and businesses that maybe you don't admire. I was going to use the word despise, but perhaps that's probably a bit too severe a word for this time in the morning. But good businesses tend to have a good culture. They tend to be successful and they tend to be led by inspirational people. The ones we don't like, well, best not to say anything about the people leading those businesses. Ultimately, though, risk management's about not just value protection, but value creation as well. So again, risk is about both threat and opportunity. So that's the first part of the standard. The second part of the standard, risk management processes. This is what many people call doing risk management. Best way to look at this slide is in two components. You've got a central process that always starts with scope, context, and criteria, and then leads on to risk assessment. This is what some people call risk registers, and then on to risk treatment. And that's supported by three surrounding processes: recording and reporting, communication and consultation, monitoring and review. The important part, though, is to focus on the center. You always start with scope, context, and criteria. Remember, risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. So unless you start with those objectives, you tend to be blundering around in the dark, just looking at risks that may or may not have an impact on your organization. And you do all of that before starting to go looking for risk spotting or risk identification. And risk identification, risk assessment is of no use on its own unless you actually do something with the information that you glean from that. Hence the importance of risk treatment, or actually making changes to your business, making changes to your processes to deal with the risks you've identified. So I said we'd always start with scope, context, and criteria, and that splits down into two parts: internal and external, as we said earlier. Now, the internal context, always start with your business plan. So if you're reviewing risks in your business, start with, well, what is it that I'm setting out to do as a business? And they could be both development projects, but they could be also your core processes that keeps your business alive. Your organization structure and design is relevant. Your culture, I mentioned culture earlier, is extremely relevant. Your capital and your skills, and skills are a form of capital. And what differentiates your business from other businesses, so your unique selling points, they're the things to start with before looking at where the risks might be. So really you're going to look at the risks to the 5 things on this screen. But that's all in the context of what's happening in the outside world. If we never realized before, this year we've all learned that what happens in the outside world matters a great deal. So this is looking at things like competition, the way society is changing, new technologies, changes in legislation, and so on and so forth. It's important to analyze those, and there are a number of tools you can use for analyzing those. PESL is a commonly used one, PESL standing for political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental risk. It's a mnemonic, if you like. So you've looked at your internal context and your external context, and you then move on to, again, as I said earlier, what people call doing risk management, risk assessment, in other words. Now, there are a lot of different risk assessment tools out there. There's a substandard to ISO 31000, ISO 31010. This one isn't 8 to 10 pages long, it's more like 60 to 70 pages long, and it sets out 60 to 70 different techniques that you can use for risk identification, risk analysis, and risk evaluation. In this short webinar this morning, we don't really have time to go through any of these. The only advice I'd leave you with is that simple is best. So the first bullet point on this slide, interviewing people, carrying out surveys, carrying out workshops, tend to be more effective than some of the more sophisticated mathematically based tools that you can use. The italicized 2 lines at the bottom of the slide matter a great deal as well. If you're going to look for risk and then to analyze how severe those risks might be, both individually and in relation to each other, make sure you've got enough valid and reliable data. If you look at the wrong information, you get the wrong results. And I think we've probably all seen examples of this in the analysis of what's happening with COVID-19 over the last few months. having the right data in the right quantity, form and frequency, and understanding what that data means is actually quite key to getting risk management right, and understanding the limitations in data as well. Again, COVID-19 has taught us a lot about how we can draw the wrong assumptions from taking a very selective set of data. And there are lots of them. There are lots of risk assessment tools. Now, okay, so what we've done is we've gone out, we've looked at our scope, we've looked at our context, we've identified, analysed some risks. What do we next do? We write them down in a risk register. Now, you know, most of us probably come across the concept of risk registers before. It's a list of risks to our objectives, more likely. The big way to get a risk register wrong is to write everything down. The way to get it right is to list the top risks. If you've got a risk register with, say, 100 things listed, how are you ever going to focus on the things that matter the most? So the way that big organizations tend to do this is to produce individual risk registers by business department or function, and then a corporate risk register focusing in on the big things. Normally I'd look for something like 10 to 15 risks on a risk register. It's not too wrong if it's up to 20. If it's above 20, you've probably got too many things listed. The idea is to give you some focus for the things that matter the most. Now, again, this is quite a busy slide, but in the register, this is just a simple example, lots of different formats available, all available usually for free online. You would normally describe your risk, and that's the left-hand column, and you then set out an assessment of how important that risk is, usually by impact and by likelihood. So the risk described on this slide is shown as medium impact, medium likelihood, and then allocate an owner. And there should only ever be one owner, because we always know what happens if you give something to two people. You both look at each other and you both think, well, the other person's going to do it. So always have a single owner, then set out the controls for the risks, and then the net risk. In other words, what happens to that risk after you've applied the controls. So you can see from this example here, the impact remains as medium, but the likelihood as low, probably, and then any further action. That's all very well and good. So you end up with a document with a lot of words on it. Documents are sometimes quite difficult to follow. So what a lot of organizations do is to plot their risk. So remember I mentioned impact and likelihood. So if you plot your risks on a matrix like this, you can see that you've got one risk, high impact, high likelihood, up in the top right-hand corner in the so-called red zone. And the suggestion is that they're the risks that maybe you should focus on first. You should focus on every one of your important risks, but you could argue that's the most important. It's not the only one that's most important, because you can see that also on this slide in the amber zone, you've got a low likelihood, or in fact two low likelihood, very high impact risks. One of those could be COVID-19, good example of a risk that was unlikely to happen, but if it did happen, was going to have a very high impact. So don't just focus on the ones in the red zone, focus on the ones further down. There are a lot of clever things you can do with risk matrices in terms of developing them out to show a lot more information as well. And that, again, that's beyond the scope of this morning's short webinar. So you've found your risks, you've drawn up a list of them. Actually, if that's all you do, then there's actually no point. So what you might as well do is to do something about those risks. And usually the way to do this is, let me introduce you to the 4 T's. You can tolerate risks. In other words, it might be such a small risk that it's actually not worth investing any effort or money in doing anything about it. You just accept the risk, but continue to monitor it. You can actually treat the risk. So you might want to install sprinkler systems against a fire risk, change a manufacturing process to make it safer, or introduce training, human and cultural change, to make something happen in a less risky way. You can terminate the activity. So, for instance, you're exporting products to a country where war has broken out. Maybe it would be a good idea not to do that in future, or maybe to move the export to somewhere, you change export markets to somewhere else. So do something different. Or you could transfer the risk. Now, I always think risk transfer's a misnomer. I did used to work in the insurance industry, and they called themselves the risk transfer industry, but no such thing as risk transfer. And let me just touch on what I mean by no such thing as risk transfer. Insurance. We've all learned, sometimes to our peril really, through COVID-19, that insurance policies don't always cover what you think they're going to cover. So you can lose out that way. Again, outsourcing. If anyone ever suggests that you can transfer risk by outsourcing it, just step back a bit and think about it. Yes, you can transfer responsibility for the process involved or the product involved, but you can't transfer responsibility for your own reputation as a result of that process or product failing. And again, contract terms, they're all very well and good until it comes to an argument with the other party to the contract terms, when it comes down to who's got the best lawyer, really. So instead of risk transfer, I tend to think of risk sharing instead. It's a partnership with another organisation that may work to your benefit and it may not. Always remember that you remain accountable for the risk, even if you do transfer it. And don't forget about residual risk. It's easy to think that, you know, you might change a manufacturing process to make it safer or higher quality, but there could still be some risk left there. So you need to go round the process again. Like all other ISO standards, ISO 31000, the risk management process is a circular process. So go and look at your risks after applying treatments and then decide what more may need to be done. Now, remember about 10, 15 minutes ago, we said there are 3 components to the risk management standard. The third component is the risk management framework. If you look at this, it does look a lot like plan, do, check, act. Design is plan, implement is do, evaluate is check, improve is act. Why do they use different words in ISO 31000? Comes down to it's just different people who've put the standard together. But there's a 5th component shown here, which the risk management community have stressed quite strongly through the standard, which is integration. Risk management should not be done as a process on its own. It should be implemented in everything you do. And it should also be led, and led in a committed way from the top of the organisation. Any organisation where the executive are not fully behind the implementation of risk management, I can tell you risk management will fail in that organisation. So the risk management framework is the way that you implement risk management in your organisation. It's the management structure for it. And it's usually evidenced in something like a risk management policy. Now, there's no right or wrong way of putting together a risk management policy. They can be one sheet of paper. They can be a dozen or more pieces of paper. The only danger with having a very comprehensive risk management policy is it might not be read. So if you come up with something that's quite long, it might be a good idea to think quite carefully about how to communicate it. Usually a risk management policy would cover the things here on this slide. I'm just going to touch on one bullet point from here, risk appetite. If you haven't come across this term before, it's the board's view of how much risk the organisation is prepared to take. And it's normally divided up by type of risk. So you might have an appetite for no injuries at work. And that, you know, by stating that in the policy, it gives guidance to everyone else in the organisation as to the actions they should be taking at work. When it comes to financial risk, you might have a moderate appetite for taking some risks, you know, experimenting with a new product or service that potentially could gain great things for your organisation, but it could fail. So risk appetite is quite a useful concept as long as you don't make it too complex. There are plenty of consultants out there who will try and make it too complex. And the best piece of advice I could give you on that is don't even go there. Keep it simple. So in the final 5-10 minutes or so of this webinar, I'm just going to touch on some hot topics in risk management, and also very briefly how to integrate risk management into your management systems and business strategies. So we've got about 10-12 slides left, and we're going to talk about interconnections between risk, speed of risk, emerging risk, and resilience. And I'm probably going to mention COVID-19 under all four. So risk interconnectivity. COVID-19, there you go, has taught us a great deal. The one thing we've all learned is how risks can work together to create an even bigger effect that would have happened from just one risk on its own. So to give you an example of that, think of the pandemic, that's risk number one, and our reliance on PPE imports from China, risk number two. The impact those two risks interacting has had a massive impact on not just hospitals and care homes, but manufacturing industry as well, for instance. A large part of the construction industry has ground to a halt because industrial PPE has been requisitioned for use in the hospital and care sectors. Getting better now, but that's an example of two risks working in concert together. This actual slide comes from the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Report, which is published every year out of Davos in Switzerland. It's on the web and it's free to download, and it talks in great depth about, you know, 1,000 people work on the development of the Global Risk Report, and it's their view on the biggest risks facing the world. And you can see here that they're drawing connections here between biodiversity loss, climate change, extreme weather, food crisis, and water crises. They were seen when this year's report was put together as the biggest risks facing the world, and very highly connected. You'll see also that infectious diseases is on this slide as well. But if you haven't seen it, have a look at it on web. A lot of really good information there. The second one I said I'd touch on was speed of risk. Whilst non-flu pandemics were predicted in the UK's first ever National Risk Register, that was published in 2008 and reiterated every year since, nobody took them seriously. I mean, if you don't believe me, go and have a look at the web, download the UK's National Risk Register, and non-flu pandemics are there, they're listed. So why the pandemic became such an issue isn't just the loss of life, nor the general lack of preparedness. It's the rapid pace at which it moved from being a risk to being a global event. It was a fast-acting risk, and it's fair to say that the whole world was caught unprepared and didn't have the time to put the preparation needed in place when the risk was actually happening. Climate change, by contrast, is currently, and I stress the word currently, moving a lot more slowly. So we still have some time to deal with that one. Although the big rider there is that that may change. A slow-moving risk can turn into a fast-moving risk quite quickly. And my one piece of advice to you on this is think about what the fast-moving risks to your business might be. Think about what could happen, and what could happen so quickly that you won't have time to put in place what you need to put in place to deal with the risk. Maybe that's something else to focus on, as well as impact and likelihood. Emerging risks. Now, some people think that 5G causes or spreads COVID-19. Now, whilst scientifically this isn't possible, the fact that some people believe it and go out and burn down phone masks, this is actually a burning phone mask, is now an emerging risk for mobile operators. It's something they didn't think they'd have to think about, but they have to think about it now because it is a risk. As well as emerging risks, think about unknown knowns. By that, what I mean are things that are known about in the world. It's just that you don't happen to know about them. And again, this year we've had a great example of this. COVID-19 was known about for quite a long time. I was reading in the paper at the weekend, I don't know if anyone saw the article, that COVID-19 was actually discovered in China now in, I think they said 2013. So it's been known about by certain people. It's just that that knowledge hasn't been spread around. So this is a bit like the drunk looking for their keys underneath the lamppost, because underneath the lamppost is where they can see, it's the things they know about. Of course, the key is lying on the floor behind the drunk and you can't see it. So think about the unknown knowns to your business, things that might be known about by someone, but you just don't happen to know about them. Now, there are a couple of animals come in here when we're talking about emerging risks and unknown knowns. First of all, black swans. The first explorers to Australia saw these large black birds floating around, but they didn't recognize them as swans because their brains didn't sort of think about the fact that a swan potentially could be black. They thought they were potentially a completely new species. Then there are the grey rhinos. The grey rhinos are the unknown knowns. They're the things that are even scarier, really, than the black swans. They're the things that are lurking unseen in the shadows. It's just you haven't turned around and seen that it's there, like COVID-19. So how do we deal with black swans and grey rhinos? Networking helps a great deal. Coming on things like this webinar, coming on training courses, meeting people through chambers of commerce, the LEPs and so on and so forth, reading a great deal and thinking the unthinkable. But whatever you read, know who to believe as well as what to trust. There's everything out there on the internet. Most of it isn't true. So therefore it's a question of trying to work out exactly what is right. It's a reality that COVID-19, the global financial crisis, and 9/11 were all predicted before they happened. It's just that most people didn't actually see that information. It wasn't widely distributed. And the people who tended to talk about it were dismissed by the rest of us as being potentially off the wall slightly. You know, yeah, that's never going to happen. Why are you talking about that? So think about in your own business what the black swans and the grey rhinos might be. And finally, resilience. If COVID-19's taught us one thing, apart from how hopeless most of us are at prediction, it's that resilience matters. Like Tigger, life is not about how fast you run or how high you climb, but how well you bounce. When businesses are failing all around us, it's the most resilient, not the most efficient, that survive. So think about what resilience means to your business, not just in terms of cash flow and capital, but resources, skills, relationships, and reputation as well. The American writer Nicholas Taleb, he actually wrote the book The Black Swan that talks about the black swans I mentioned earlier. He tells another story in the book about kidneys. Most of us are born with 2 kidneys. There's no reason that we need 2 kidneys. I mean, we need 2 eyes and 2 ears for stereoscopic vision and hearing. But the reason we have 2 kidneys is it gives us resilience. If one kidney fails, we've got another one. Now, if you gave the job of designing the human being to an accountant, sorry, any accountants on the call, I mean a bad accountant, not a good accountant, they would probably come back and say, well, it'd be more efficient to have 1 kidney because it's lighter, less body to service, cheaper to operate, and so on and so forth. So we'd have 1 kidney. But no, we were all born with 2 kidneys because it gives us resilience. If one part breaks down for reasons we don't see coming, we've still got the other one there to work. You'll see a lot more on the subject of resilience, I predict, over the next few months or years. And many organisations are looking afresh at their organisation to think, right, okay, you thought back to July last year, we probably had no idea. None of us had any idea where we'd be July this year. So where are we going to be July next year? I challenge you to think about that and get it right. The only thing that you can predict is the more resilient your organisation, the more likely you are to be still in business this time next year. Just bring all this slide up. Again, quite a lot going on here. I said we'd touch on how risk management can be used to embed risk-based thinking in your management systems. Now, a new standard, well, actually, it's a guidance document, was published by ISO earlier this year, ISO IWA 31. And that actually sets out how to take the three components of ISO 31000, principles, process, and framework, over here on the left side of the screen, and how to embed them in the 10 clauses of Annex SL, the high-level structure that we have in management system standards. There's actually quite a detailed matrix and guidance in IWA 31 that sets out that process. Why would you want to do that? Well, a few reasons. Simplify your systems by integrating your risk management into each part of your ISO 9000 implementation or your ISO 45001 implementation. It's simpler to do it together rather than do it separately. Optimizing performance, saving cost by implementing risk management within your other standards implementations. You're saving money, so you haven't got two separate processes going on. Better integration into processes and into your operations, and ultimately protecting and enhancing your reputation and improving business opportunities. So I'm aware of that. That's quite a rapid run through of quite a lot of material here. I'm just going to bring myself back up on screen. That's what we said we'd cover. And before we move on to questions, it's always good to leave people with takeaways. Sorry, I can't give you a horrible looking burger and chips here, but there are 12 things on this slide. What's risk management about? It's an organisational wide approach to the management of both threats but also opportunities, and it applies risk-based decision making to all aspects of a business, not just health and safety, not just quality. And it's about helping you achieve your objectives and creating value. We didn't talk about change a great deal, but obviously anticipating change, anticipating the future. We touched on risk interconnections and on speed of risk, grey rhinos, black swans, emerging risks. I didn't use these words earlier, but there's no such thing as normal anymore. And I think what we've learned this year is never say never. So what are we going to do about all of this? Keeping it simple is the best strategy, I always think. Anyone that brings jargon and complex process into risk management, it's probably going to go wrong. Resilience and redundancy matters a great deal. We didn't have time to talk about people a great deal, but I'd leave you with a message that actually this is all about people and the way that people behave and act in business. And if ever there were a time for risk management, it's now. Seize the moment. Now's the time for effective risk management. If you want to talk to anyone in your business about risk management, now's the time to talk about getting it right. So I think we've got a bit of time for some questions, Jennifer.
Yeah, we've had some great questions. So the first one is, how can we account for the speed of risk?
If I knew the answer to that, how can we, yeah. I mean, I would always go back to spending enough time looking at what's going on in the outside world, so you've got a better appreciation of the things that are likely to hit you like the express train. If you know it's coming, if you've looked down the track and you can see it coming, it's a lot easier to deal with it. The other way you can actually deal with speed of risk is through building a resilient organization. You know, we can't predict everything. I think I said at the beginning, prediction is futile. You can try and predict, but you can't always predict everything. Some things are going to happen, And if you've built quite a resilient organization, you're more likely to survive the risk that's going to hit you quickly. The big one that's coming up is climate change, obviously. And one of the big threats from COVID-19 actually is that initially, by focusing on the medical side of COVID-19, as we all had to, we were ignoring the economic impact of COVID-19. But the other big impact of COVID-19 is that we've been able to spend less time focusing on the really big risk which is out there, which is climate change. Now, climate change sounds all very hippie and sort of like optional, but what this means at the end of the day is massive changes to the way that we live our lives. If you live somewhere on a riverbank like Tewkesbury, you will know all about climate change. If you live in East Yorkshire, as they discovered last winter, you will know about climate change because it affects
and Worcester.
You.
We are prone to those same floodings.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think kind of just to echo that, it's about businesses and business owners not putting their head in the sand when things happen. So GDPR is a classic example of that. So many examples of people that, didn't prepare for the GDPR, even though we knew what date it was coming. We knew that was coming. And actually that info security piece has actually been brought to light with the COVID situation, in that, making sure that people can, work safely from home in terms of a cybersecurity risk. That became like one of those network of risks that kind of shot off the COVID-19 situation. Yeah. I think is that
I'm glad you mentioned
GDPR,
Jennifer, because I know on the call, I think we've got Andy Stiles from Risk Evolved as well. Morning, Andy. And Andy always says to me, the key thing about getting GDPR right, in fact, indeed, any aspect of cyber and data security, is thinking of it in business terms, in simple business and process terms.
Absolutely.
Rather than purely technical terms.
We had another question, which was, does QSL offer any form of risk registers, templates? Yes, we do. We've got a number of different templates we can send out. We've got a number of different resources, actually. So the first one is a returning to the office safely. We have a risk register. We also have some business continuity risk templates as well that we can provide you. So if you want those, please do let me know. I'll drop my email into the chat so you can drop me an email. We also have a resource on resilience. So we have a webinar that we recorded a couple of weeks ago with a company called Zentano on resilience. That's personal and business resilience. So again, take a look at that on our website. I'll drop that into the chat now. And we also have, talking about kind of protecting our businesses for the future, we had a webinar on the 5 surprising ways to boost the value of your business, which talks a lot about recurring revenue, which is one of the ways that you can protect your businesses from situations like this. So there's that one. The next question we have for you, Steve, is do you have any recommendations on sources for tools and templates which concentrate specifically on risks related to business expansion, i.e. analysing and managing the financial risks, for example?
Quite happy to, I could put my email into chat if that's okay.
Yeah.
Quite happy to provide some things that I've got on that. Because there is a lot out there, and the problem with just doing a general search through the internet is that sadly risk management can be viewed as sort of one-sided in some parts of the world. So what I mean by that is, if you talk to the health and safety community, they'll think about risk purely as the risk to life and limb rather than the risk to business. Whereas my approach to risk is to look at risk holistically from a business viewpoint. So you want to be looking at the right resources rather than maybe pure safety focused, quality focused, or project management focused approaches. But yeah, if I pop my email into chat, we can deal with it.
And we also have some resources available as well. So I've popped my email in there as well. So I'm sure between the both of us, we should be able to provide you with something. We have a question from Andy, actually. So I'm going to name and shame him, bless him.
It's not
Andy, just
difficult, is it?
just to kind of explain the relationships between ISO, QSL and Risk Evolves. We partnered up for the GDPR training quite a lot back in 2018. And then we do some partnership work as well with clients to make sure that they get the best specialists for their needs, all things risk. So that's a bit of an explanation. Well, it would be good, just while we come to this question, if people could just pop us a little bit of feedback in the chat as to how they found today's webinar, just because obviously doing these, you don't necessarily get a lot of interaction as you do with like a training session. So if it would be possible just to give us a bit of feedback, then that would be great. Maybe the one thing that you found the most useful, just to help us plan for anything future that we might do. But in the meantime, while you're doing that, the question that we've got, Steve, is, and I think it's our final question, just looking at the time, we're well on track for 11 o'clock finish, which is great, is from Andy, is if an organisation, we think rightly or wrongly, we are already good at risk management, what added benefit does the ISO 31000 give us? So if we think we're great, what else could the 31001 give us?
If you think you're great, then great. The trouble is, I always think, if I think I'm great at something, I'm probably fooling myself, because usually I'll go and ask someone else and they'll say, no, Steve, actually, did you not realize that you're not particularly good at that aspect of being great? Yeah, it's always good. It's useful as a benchmark. And I mean, I'm sure you share the same view, Jennifer, that standards aren't best practice, they're common practice. So if you want to go out there and benchmark yourself to look at how other people are doing things, 31,000 is a good guide to, well, how's everyone else doing it? Because that's the base level, it's the benchmark, if you like. You don't actually have to go out and buy the standard. There are plenty of simple guides to 31,000 on the web. And we can provide one as well, I'm sure, between Risk Evolves and I.
Absolutely.
You don't lose anything by looking at it. Yeah, I think I'm pretty good at quality, but when did I last look at the ISO 9000 series of standards?
It's a good refresher, I think. I think you know, it's almost it could be, you know, good for morale, that actually you can prove to people within your organization that, you know, yes, we think we're great, but this is why. It can make it tangible, I think, kind of looking to
exactly. I've talked to plenty of organizations about risk who view risk as purely compliance based and purely threat, you know, purely
and not
risk
opportunity.
as a negative, not what we do all day. And you know, when I talk to businesses about risk, I talk about opportunity achievement. Yeah, for me, we take risks. This webinar this morning was taking a risk. Hopefully we've all achieved something from it, you know.
Brilliant. Yeah, I think one of the things that I've been taught is that, you know, we are all risk managers, whether we think it or not, in our daily lives. Before you cross a road, you assess the risk. And I know that's a really simple example, but, you know, we assess risks as human beings day in, day out. And it doesn't mean that we don't do things. It doesn't mean that we don't cross that road. It doesn't mean that we don't drive those cars, or you know, obviously now we've got the risk of, you know, when we're going out and about into society and things like that, and we're all risk managers, really.
It's COVID-19. You know, it's such a wonderful gift horse, really, for risk management. If we viewed COVID-19 as purely a threat, we would not do anything ever again. We'd say, right, okay, the world's now a more dangerous place. Until a vaccine comes out, we won't go out and do anything. Well, we're 40 years on from the HIV virus being identified, yet you know, the human race carries on and there is no vaccine. So we've got to learn to live with another risk.
I read a really interesting article by the McKinsey organization when you were saying about making sure that you get things from sources. They're obviously one of the ones, and it was all about how actually small businesses, particularly SME businesses in I think it was the US, the study that was done, but across the world, have really stepped up during this time. And you know, like you said, we know that it's been a terrible time for some, and there's been some awful consequences of it. However, there has also been the fact that actually leaders and SME businesses and leaders within those SMEs have really stepped up. So so I am going to just move to our final question. So this question, great session, great, lovely for the feedback, thank you. We have risks documented through ISO 9, 14 and 45. We have a problem getting awareness throughout the business. Do you have any thoughts on this? Oh, this is a classic. You're not alone.
Have we got another hour? I mean, I got some
In a
advice.
nutshell.
I met the lady who runs risk management for US naval ship repair yards once, and I didn't know that that's owned by BAE Systems. So us Brits, we are responsible for mending the US Navy's ships. And she said to me, well, some simple things. The first one is speak the language of the business. So if you've got a financial CEO, you want to turn risk management into financial terms. Use the same language that's used in your business. If you're in an engineering business, turn risk management into an engineering language. That's the first thing. Second thing is keep it simple. The third thing is invite yourself to meetings. So this works if you're in a larger company or larger organization where nobody really knows who should be at a meeting. So go along, be in the meeting, start talking about risk. Great thing about that is you appear on the minutes and you get invited to the next meeting. So wheedle your way into the organization. But the best one she came up with was find out what your CEO's pet project is and then work with your CEO, work with him or her on achieving that project using risk management. Because if you don't show the value of risk management related to the most important things on your CEO's mind, they're not really going to think of you as an asset. They're going to think of you as an expensive liability. But whatever you do, don't just talk about health and safety and quality.
Make it
because
real.
they're hygiene factors, really. Think about business objectives. Yeah,
absolutely. You know, the communication within an organisation is always a tricky one. I would say it's consistency and regularity for us. That's how we would promote getting awareness. It's consistency. It's not just once a year. You know, feed it through inductions, reviews. You know, as Steve said, invite yourself to those kind of top level meetings if you can to get the awareness out. You know, putting it in as part of people's training plans, that they must understand the management systems within the organisation and how it relates to their role, what's in it for them. You've probably heard of that sort of tact. So I would, consistency and regularity is probably my biggest tip on there. So, right, so I think that brings us to an end. So again, thank you everybody for your comments and your questions and your feedback. I'm just going to read out something that Andy's actually contributed, which is on the questions which people might not be able to see. So it says, great session, and as Steve says, it's not rocket science and it's not or shouldn't be complicated. The key takeaway is the correct way to consider and assess risk has not changed. It's proven methodology to consider what we do for risks and opportunities that are ever changing, the grey elephants or the black swans. So I'm going to leave you with that. I'm going to thank Steve very much for your presentation today. Excellent kind of run through. I know it's a big topic in a short time, but hopefully that's given people a bit of a flavour. And obviously we've popped our contact details on there. This session has been recorded, so we will be adding this to our website, and no doubt it will go on the Risk Evolves website as well. So if you want to show anyone else within your organisation, then that would be absolutely great. So I'll be looking to get that out hopefully by tomorrow, if not Monday latest. If you want any of the free resources, just drop me an email. I'll be more than happy to send those over to you. Similarly, if you want anything from Steve, then please do drop him an email. So yeah, I think that brings us to an end. Thank you all very much. We've had some lovely comments, and again, thank you, Steve. Much appreciated.
And thanks for the opportunity, Jennifer. You know,
no
it's been a
problem
pleasure.
at all. It's been great. And yeah, we have another webinar planned for the end of July, which is all about integrated management systems. So Steve actually touched a little bit on that with regards to 31,000 and the Annex SL. So we are looking at getting some promotion about that soon. That will all come out to you. So yeah, thank you very much, everybody, and have a great rest of your Thursday.
Yeah, bye everyone.
Bye-bye.